what you don't know is that he is also a computer tech, and while he's changing the faucet, the washers in your faucet, he's also can fix your computer while he's there.
Modern thinker.
Wasting time.
I gotta tell you, every guy I'm calling, next time I need somebody to fix something, it's Nick, because he can do my computer while he's there.
Okay. These are the things I'm going to try and talk about today. We have, because of our time limit, we may not get to all of them. Talk about sump versus sewage, sizing, system design, the components, all the things that go in them. Installation, which is really the most important part, which is followed up by do's and don'ts. And I look at it this way, that number one, the code book doesn't tell you everything. If you take it to an engineer does not know, he's never put one in, so he doesn't know all the little things. If you just, started working in the plumbing trade and somebody called up and told you to put a pump in, nobody ever told you how to do it right. So there's a lot of guessing that goes on. So what I'm trying to do, based on all the bad ones and the good ones I've seen, sort of just point out things to watch out for, and because you don't want to, 3 comebacks to a job and you're losing money. So that's how I'm trying to approach it.
Let's just skip to 5 and 6 then.
Okay. Just a minute here. I think that the most important thing every plumber needs is an electrician for a friend. You are not hooking up disposers when you do pumps. There's a lot to it. And unless you got both licenses, you really shouldn't be touching the wires. It's just, there's too much you can do wrong. And you burn a pump up, or you can burn up a control panel, that's a lot of money. So build that into your bid. You're going to have an electrician check whatever, and maybe he does the electrical work and you do the piping work. That's the best way to handle it.
No connections inside the pit, and then seal that.
I got some good pictures of that.
Putty, eats up those control boxes.
My next suggestion to you is to find an expert, which means, typically the people in the pump business, and Rob, he worked with me at Westmark for years with Denzaler. Each of these local people have a guy sitting there all day long in the office who really understands this stuff, and you can call him up. And if he can't answer it, he'll send a guy like Rob or me out on the street to go look at what's going on in that hole, and we'll try to help you figure out. So there's plenty of help. You just got to ask for it. Next thing, if you've got plans, be sure you read them. Check every little thing on there. And now, like I said before, maybe the plans are right, but maybe they're wrong. Because a lot of times building departments don't check everything, and they may stamp approved on something, and it ain't going to work. So that's why you got to protect yourself. You also want to go out to the site and do a lot of preliminary work. First thing is check the voltage. I mean, they may tell you, I got 120. Well, they're going to have you tie into 240 over here. Maybe they've got 3-phase and they don't realize they got it. These are things that you have to be careful about. You want to ask all the questions. And the best question, may I suggest, is how many young females are living in this building? Because it makes a big difference on what kind of pump you put in there and other things. You may need to sell them a few signs as well to go in the bathrooms about what to do. So these are, remember, if the first time it clogs, you're going to come out there whether it's your fault or not, and you got to eat that one. The second time, then you can start charging. If you can, take some pictures. So, because you can't remember everything, and do I tie in over here or I tie in over there? Just try and protect yourself. Get as ready as you can. And of course, you got to walk around and make sure you know where all the power and the water and the intake, the discharge, all that stuff, where that's hiding. So you got fall, all those other things you need to do. Okay. What I would always tell people when they call me is, before I help you, I would like you to draw me a picture. Doesn't have to be a Van Gogh. It can just take a piece of paper, your pencil, here's where the fixtures are, here's where the tank is, here's where the pipe's going to go out of the building. Just, it can be kindergarten, I don't care. Just show me so you know what you want. And I need you to put on there some dimensions. I need to know how high, how far, how many elbows. You know, because I can't size the system for you if I don't know that, and I may not have the time to come run out and look at the place for you. So if you want me to size it and design it for you right, please give me as much as you can. And there's actually a questionnaire that most of the pump people have that they'll give you and say, okay, how many toilets and you know, is it commercial, residential, and just, you know, 20 questions that'll really help them pick out the right thing to do, you know. For example, you say, what kind of pipe am I going to discharge into? Is it iron or is it plastic? You know, what size is it? Well, iron is not as smooth on the inside as plastic, so we have to calculate that a little different. If I have to dump in, if I'm dumping into 2-inch, I get my 20 gallons per minute and I'm okay. If I'm dumping into 3-inch, I have to boost the GPM because I have to keep the poop moving at 2 feet per second. And so it takes more gallons per minute to move the poop at 2 feet per second, the bigger the pipe gets. Okay, that's the magic number, 2 feet per second for poop. Okay, very important. So these are the kind of questions that are important to get asked way ahead of time. Okay. Now the expert, he's asked all these questions. He's going to figure out how many fixtures, how many GPM, everything. He's going to recommend some equipment. He may say, okay, you know, you guys got all this crazy stuff going on. We ought to put a grinder pump in your place instead of an ordinary sewage pump. Yeah, he'll try to. He's not just trying to upsell you. He's trying to keep you from having to go back 10 times to fix something that should have been fixed the first time. And he'll also sort of recommend to you, you know, how you should lay it out. Now, you need this part, and you need this part, and you need this part. He goes, can I just buy a pump? No, you can't just buy a pump. You need all this other stuff to go with it. You know? Okay, so this is the typical questionnaire. And you notice it talks about a lot of piping stuff and fixture stuff, but it's got a whole section that talks about electrical. So that's pretty important. And he's going to fill out a form like this, and he goes, okay, I got so many fixtures, and the pipeline is going to have so many 45s and 90s in it. You know, he's really doing a scientific job here, you know. It's not, you just can't do this with it, you know, it doesn't work. Next he's going to say, well, we got to figure out the basin. Now, you know, you think about it, every pump has to sit in a hole, right? Now, sometimes you're given a hole. You know, there's a vault in the ground or something, but most of the time for these systems you have to buy a hole, you know, or buy a basin to set in a hole, and so this has to be sized out. You got to know where to put the inlet and where to put the outlet. You got to have a lid to go on it. And, you know, is it going to be a 2-inch vent or a 3-inch vent? You know, all these questions you have to plan this well in advance. You know, because you can't just start cutting holes when you get out there. Okay, and now you got this table here, this friction head table, and I know you can't see it, but you see how it's gray here? That's the zone where you keep 2 feet per second for every size. So right here on 2-inch pipe, when you get to this point here, you're getting your 20 gallons per minute, and that's going to give you 2 feet per second, and that poop is going to move just fine. Okay, so there's all this stuff. Most people don't realize that the pump guy all these wheels are going on in his head trying to make this all work. Okay, and now this is your typical simplex system. This is what you see in an awful lot of houses, and for the plumbers that are here that do repair work, I'm sure LA's full of these people, these houses where they have a bathroom halfway down underneath the house because they're built on a hillside, you know, and they got the rest of the house is fine. It goes straight to the street, but this one bathroom in the back has to have a pump, and so this is the typical installation. And oftentimes they'll use an automatic pump. When by automatic I mean it's got a float switch that makes itself come on, which is really the least efficient way to do it, but it's simple and cheap, and that's why they do it. If I may point out one thing to you here, you see this little box up here? That's an alarm. And alarms are pretty dang important because they'll tell you that something's wrong before it gets critical. So you know, if the alarm is usually set so that it comes on right about here, about where the discharge point is, and then you go, you know, if it keeps going, it's gonna flood and it's gonna fill up the house and everything. So that's why you wanna have an alarm. It is required in the code, but a lot of people shine it on and don't do it. Especially, you know, if they do this without a permit, which never happens, of course.
Never.
Now, your duplex systems, they're, you know, again, they're basic pumps and controls, but you notice the best way to handle a two-pump system is to install a control panel. And what the control panel does, it makes the pumps take turns. First pump A, then pump B. And if it gets going a little too fast for pump A, it'll kick pump B on at the same time, so they both can work on it, you know. And if the water keeps coming, well, then it has an alarm built into it, so the light will flash and the buzzer will go off, and you know it's time to call somebody in to fix it. Now, I'm going to point something out to you that is very, very critical. You see these two power sources coming into the control panel? One feeds the pumps. The other one feeds the alarm. The alarm and the power and the pump power have to be separate. They cannot be on the same breaker. Can you guess why?
Yeah, if the pump breaks down.
Yeah, if you know it gets if the pump jams, it's going to break the breaker, and then the alarm won't work either. Yeah. So whether you have a control panel like that, or you have a separate alarm like this, it has to be wired to a completely different circuit, or else you're wasting your money. Okay. So again, now you got out on the job, and you're getting ready to do it. But before you get there, sit down and study all the instruction sheets. You know, the things you throw away when you open the box. You want to read those things. Okay. You also want to go around the site, make sure you know the site's ready for you. You know, is the hole in the ground ready? Is there arrangements to have that electrical coming in? Do you have enough pipe to reach to the discharge areas? All these kind of things. Of course, you have your electrician there with you, so he can make sure the voltage is correct and everything. Of course, he was supposed to come before you bid the job, but you better have him now for sure. You have to plan things. You have to know where your junction boxes are going to be. Now, does everybody know what a junction box is used on a pump for? Well, good. Okay, we got one.
Hoping.
Yeah, okay. Well, a lot of times your pump is sitting in the hole, and you know your power source, your plug or whatever you're going to use, is not that far away. Okay, so you just buy a pump that's got a long enough cord to reach all the way there. You know, but a lot of times that isn't the best arrangement. Maybe you're for some reason or another you can't get all the way back to the power source or the control box. So what you do is you put a box out of the pit and you run the pump wire up to it. Then the electrician, he takes and runs wire back to wherever he has to run it to get you power. So having a junction box is great because it means, you know, you get out of the hole, you got someplace to hook up your pump, and then from there on the electrician takes his part. Similarly, a disconnect. Now, if you remember this picture here, this box is your disconnect. It means that you can shut the power off close to your pump and your control and do your work without having to go all the way back to the breaker and shut off the breaker. So this is another thing you need to build in. I mean, will it cost a little bit more to add that disconnect? Yes, it will. But when you got to go back and service this thing, it's a whole lot better than say, Mrs. Jones, will you please shut the breaker for me? And then she shuts the wrong one off and you get zapped. You know, so that's kind of thing. Did I mention that even though you're a non-electrician, you should have a voltage tester with you? Yes. Okay. So we start with the basin, and the basin can be, you know how it is, if you've been working around LA long enough, you know they could be in somebody's basement, they could be behind the building, it could be in the building. They could be under the building on a little ledge underneath the house, all kinds of stuff. So you gotta secure it, because if we have a bad earthquake, that thing's gonna jump, it's gonna bounce around. So you need to secure it. It needs to be on a very firm platform, and if you think about it, you fill that thing full of water, it's gonna weigh a few hundred pounds, so it has to be very secure. If the basin is in the ground, you have to be very careful about that, because the earth moves around. So if it looks like one of those areas where you could have a lot of problems, I tell them, let's build a vault. Pour 4 walls and a floor, or dig a hole and put some cinder block in there, do something so that your basin will not get crushed in case there is some serious earth movement. Now, if you feel secure that the ground's not going to move on you too much, what you can do is you can over dig the hole and put gravel or pea gravel or rock around it to act as a barrier for you. And this is an example of that here. This is all this around here is pea gravel or crushed rock that is protecting the basin. Okay. Obviously, you got to run your inlet piping coming from the fixtures. You also have to run vent piping. Now, this is sort of a gross story, but I was called out to Lake Arrowhead one time. One of these fancy cabin places, and they said, "This pump's not working." So the plumber and I, get out there, and we were in our boots, and we're digging it up, and we pull the lid off the pump basin, and it's full of poop, all the way to the top. And I said, what's going on here? Well, it took them a while, but they never put a vent on this basin. And so the pump was strong enough to push the liquid out, but it just kept accumulating poop. So it took a couple hours to shovel all the poop out of there and finally get it all cleaned up. But you got to have a vent, okay? And there's a secondary reason for vents too. You usually don't want to have a ground level vent, partly because kids will kick it off. But there's bad smells that come out of there a lot of times, so you want to run it up the side of the building. Okay. Now, you got to run your discharge piping. You don't want your check valve and you don't want your shutoff valve in the basin. You want them out of the basin. So you got to do that. And of course, now in the fancier system where you have float switches, you got to install a holder that will hold the float switches, the cables, so that they'll hang. And there's plenty of room for them to do that, so they can swing around when they got to swing around. And if you're really, this is probably the one thing that people should do most often, and that is put some kind of removal system. And you get bigger pumps that weigh a couple of 100 pounds. You don't want to just be pulling them up like that. And they're usually often very deep also. So you want to have one of these guide systems that allows you to pull them up, get them out, work on them, put them back in, and when you drop them back down, they automatically connect to the piping again. So again, it's an added expense, but if it means that the repair guy who comes in a couple of years from now means that he isn't going to charge you an extra 6 hours for getting it in and out, then that's worth it. Okay, so in float switches, now float switches are basically little balls on the end of a cord, and inside of them they have these little switches. They used to be mercury switches, but they're not anymore. Now they're mechanical type. And what they do is they tell the pump to stop, they tell it to come on, they tell the second pump to come on, or the third or the fourth, depends how complicated it is. And they also tell the alarm to come on. And basically what happens, they hang straight, then as the water comes up, they go sideways, that turns the switch on, and then when the water goes down, it drops down to vertical again, and the switch opens up. So it's very simple, but you have to plan for these inside the basin. You have to have a rack to suspend them from. And the other thing too is you got to put a little weight on them so they hang straight. It's a little trick. You'll see some pictures here in a minute that'll make all this a lot more clear for you. Okay. Okay. Now, Ron, was it you that talked about the goop? Oh, okay. So, where the cords leave the basin, and they go up to the junction box,
Which is outside your
and then further on up the control panel. You want to goop those. And the reason you want to goop them is, sewage gas is very explosive. Okay? Plus, sometimes you don't even know what people put down the drain. They could be putting, flammable materials down there. So what you want to do is you want to take some of that goop that vulcanizes at room temperature, seal the conduit at the basin, seal it again where it enters the junction box, and seal it again at the control panel, so that none of that ever gets all the way up. Because what's inside the control panel? A bunch of electrical switches, sparks. So we don't want that.
Good one is when painters decide to clean their brushes in that lower sink there, so you got full of paint there.
And they wonder why the plastic pipe rots out after that. Okay.
Mario,
Yes.
you had a question here?
Yes, yes.
Now, I know you were talking about putting that on the conduit and then on the box and right, that little blue stuff. Now, as a plumber, we go out, we install the pumps. Who would be responsible for putting that on there? Ourselves or the electricians?
Well, I would say you've got to make sure he does his job, but really he's doing the wiring for you. Okay? But again, since you're the primary contractor on the job, you would have the responsibility.
At least get one in the pit.
So now, before you put the pump in the hole, there's a little trick. Where the pipe comes out of the pump, you've got to have a little hole there. And the reason why you have to have a little hole is that in case air gets trapped under the check valve, you could run that pump for days and it won't move any water because there's just air between the pump and the check valve. You have to get all that air out of there. So usually what you do is you come up and it depends on how the basin's laid out and where everything's located. But basically you're drilling a 3/16 hole in the side of the pump. And when you turn on the pump, that little hole will squirt, but that's okay because it's just a very small amount. But that always eliminates the air in the system so that you're able to open lift the flapper in the check valve. If you didn't get rid of the air, the flapper would never open.
Hey Mario?
Yes.
On those, it's real important to kind of angle that down a little bit, because a lot of times it'll splash up and out of the top. And when that pump kicks on, you hear that cover off, you don't want to be squirted. But what also works real good is to heat up a nail with your torch and with a pair of vice grips, and you can just go right in there, and
Touch
it's
it,
a little
yeah.
easier than
Interesting.
your drill down.
You got squirted once or twice.
Goes from copper?
Now, here's another good thing. Attach a lifting cable. You never want to lift the pump by its cord. And that's a quick trick to the repair shop. But the other thing is, a lot of times, if you're using plastic pipe for your discharge piping, how do you get the plastic pipe into the pump? You use a male adapter. What's the weakest plastic fitting? Unless you get the reinforced kind. It's a male adapter. So you always want to do your lifting with with some kind of cable, a rope or something. Stainless is the best stuff to use.
The yellow rope is really good too, because if you drop it, it floats, so it's easy to hook up.
Okay. Yeah, I knew everybody would have something to contribute to this. So. Yes, Ron?
Mario, what about fastening the pumps? Any anchorage?
Well, it depends. Most of the time it's not necessary. The basin for sure, but there are times where it's more critical where it sits in the basin, and you may want to secure it so that it stays in that location. Whoever comes after you will put it back in that same location because clearances are often important. You need the float switches have to do their thing, and you don't want it hanging up on different components in the basin.
Mario,
Yes.
when the pump comes on, does it get that centrifugal force of torque?
You're going to get some of that, but I haven't seen it had it be a problem. I've done some 40 horses, and they haven't been a problem. But,
Unless you're holding it together with no hook coupling.
Here's where your copper pipe in. You have the hole, and this way a piece of copper.
Okay. So this gives you an idea. These are the kind of hangers that you use to put your float switches on, and you can see in this picture how the float switch hangs down. You have this little weight attached to it at the bending point. That's the point where the float is going to go sideways. If you didn't have the weight, the float would just keep floating all the way up wherever the top of the water is. And it may come on way too late, so by having the weight, it forces the cable to be vertical, and the float only floats up where it's supposed to float up. So again, you're gonna set the pump in the hole, lower it by the lifting cable, run the power cord out to the junction box, connect connect the pump pipe to the other pipe, and always keep that 3/16 hole below the basin cover. You don't want to get squirted. You got to add the basin cover. Now think about this. Sometimes, my whole preference is if you're going to have a basin, let's have a solid cover. Let's run all the piping, all the wires out the side. But not everybody does it that way. So if you do happen to have a basin that's got openings on the top, you want to make sure that you've got good grommets around there so there's no water leakage or gas leakage outside of there. And generally speaking, these lids come with either a 2-inch or a 3-inch hole, so you got to have 2-inch or 3-inch grommets for everything. Coordinating your vent pipe and your discharge pipe with the basin covers and stuff is very important. Now you want to do your testing with the cover off, but at the same time, you know that eventually you have to put it back on. Okay, so first thing I'd say is test dry, and by that I mean you can get some kind of stick or something to lift the float cables for you in the proper sequence, so you can see that everything goes on when it's supposed to go on. Also make sure that the alarm sounds, you know. This is, you're pretty much checking electrical at this point, that everything is hooked up the right way. Next, you're going to test it wet. Run some clean water in there. Note where the water, it should, you know, you're going to determine the height of when the water should kick on. Now, that's based on a calculation of cycle time. So, we're trying to shoot for about a 20-second run cycle. The reason we shoot for a 20-second run cycle is it's the same way that you hate driving down the road and doing stop and go. It's bad for your motor, bad for your brakes, bad for your transmission. Well, if a pump comes on, runs for 3 seconds and shuts off, that's not too good. That's going to beat the heck out of there. The plumber will be back next year putting the new pump in. It just tears it up. So, and the worst ones are these people that they buy a pump like this, where all it has is this much travel on the float, okay? And they'll try to run 2 bathrooms off of one of those pumps. There's 5 or 6 people living in the house. That pump's going off 40, 50 times a day, and you know, they wonder why it keeps breaking down. Well, if you have your basin set with the float switches at the right level, it'll get to the right amount of time, then it'll run down, and it'll only run a few times a day. Okay. So that's why you check to make sure that it's filled up adequately. You also you don't ever want the water to go above the inlet. So in other words, where all the sewage is coming in, you certainly don't want the water to ever get that high. You want to be sure it stays below that. Now, so often, you're not the guy putting it in the first time. You're the guy coming in later. And the first thing that I tell people is, you do not want to just put back in what came out. Because how do you know it was right the first time? Did they do all their homework? We don't know, you know. So, of course, this is where you start asking questions. You know, was the pump sized right? Was it the right kind of pump? Was it put in properly? Changing inflow conditions, that's saying, okay, when this pump was first put in, it was all old people there living there, and they had their way of living, and then you got a bunch of young people came in, and they started putting different kinds of sewage down, and Lord knows what kind of chemicals and drugs and things like that. So things have changed a little bit, you know. It's now a party house. It used to be an old folks' house, yes.
What's the typical lifespan? Residential, just a 4-member family. What's typically?
You know, if you treat it right, you can get 10 years out of these things. maybe longer, but if you don't treat it right, you're gonna pay.
And most of the systems I've seen have been 110. How come they're not using a 220, being it's pulling quite a bit of amperage?
Well, you see, that's another good point that an electrician would obviously recommend that, If the house has 220, maybe we can use it, If it doesn't have 220, you're stuck with 110. And actually, three-phase, if you're gonna run a lot of pumps at high volume, three-phase is the way to go. So, and of course, the last question you're gonna ask is it too short a run cycle? That way it beat itself up. Okay, so there are these troubleshooting guidelines. And the troubleshooting would help if anybody wants a copy of that, just ask me, I'll provide it to you. And it's really a good checklist to go down and say, this, okay, now we know why it failed. And you go fix whatever needs to be fixed. But this is a great help to you. Now, I won't go into all these because we're going to be pushing the limit on here, but if you'd like this do's and don'ts, again, this is things that not just for you, the installer, but also for the homeowner, so they know how to treat their pump. Okay? And so this is this is a system installed in a house in Pomona, and it's outside of the house. It's a little one-story slab-built house. So he's got his out here. You notice he's got his rack to hold his float switches. He's got his two discharges for the two pumps. They come out of the basin. They go off separately. Here's your check valve. Here's your ball valves for shutoffs. And then they tie in to go into the sewer lateral. And when it was all done, this is how it looks when it's all cleaned up. He might put a diamond plate over this to protect it some more, but the idea is it can look very neat. It doesn't have to look sloppy. And here's his control panel that he had, which he put on a post right there. Now, this is one of my classic bad guys. This is an apartment building out in the San Fernando Valley. They did a pretty decent job of putting the pumps in, running the discharge piping, and float switches there. But you see this junction box up here? Down below?
Good.
That's what it looked like.
Hey.
So that's why the junction box does not go in the hole. And why the inspector didn't catch it, I don't know. That's city of LA too, right, Martin?
Yeah.
That's why they're already there.
But a lot of those pumps do get changed out without a permit.
Well, this was brand new. This was brand new. Okay, now, this is a classic, beautiful case. Okay. This is UCLA. They called me up. They said, we keep flooding our underground parking, and we keep replacing pumps. So I said, let's do it right. So these guys, I mean, first class. Look at this, copper discharging, beautiful check valves with threaded ends, flange ball valves. I mean, these guys they spend our state money real good. Here's the guide rail system going down to lift the pumps out easily when they need to. It's hard to see, but there is some cable, there's a stainless cable in there. Excuse me. So this was really if they could all look that good, that'd be great. Now, I'm going to talk very briefly about code because we're running out of time, but there's Chapter 7 has a lot about this. They don't tell you everything to do, but they tell you a lot of things to do. And for example, they tell you the minimum dimensions on your discharges. So a single-family residence, you can get away with 2-inch discharge. Everything else has to be at least 3-inch discharge. Okay. They talk about the different sizes of piping. They'll also talk how important it is you have to have a check valve. And they'll talk about venting. And they talk about tanks. Right, you got to have an adequately built tank. They for sure say alarm. Okay, so there's no question about this. It's a code requirement for alarm.
For public use.
Yes, but I mean, it's a dummy if you don't put it in. Okay. It talks about the covers on the pumps. It talks about where you can use a grinder pump if you need to. The grinder pumps, just so you know, they grind everything up so finely it looks like vegetable soup when it comes out. And because of that, You don't have to have as big a pipeline. An 1.5-inch pipeline is good enough. Actually, 1.25 most of the time is good enough. Okay, so that's it. Now, one last little issue was, and Martin can speak to this better than I can. In the most recent code change, the discharge piping became a very critical issue. And they said no longer can you have a discharge pipe using anything but an approved pressure rated pipe coming out. So that means no more any no-hub. You can't use no-hub anymore for that. You can't use compression joints. You gotta use something that's really good. So I want you to know that Spears makes a lot of Y fittings. So if you've got a duplex system and you need to feed this pump and this pump into a common discharge, we got Ys. And it's pressure rated, so it would take care of that for you. The reason I bring this point to you is, yes, they do make Ys and DWV fittings, but that's not a pressure rated fitting. So you got to use something that's pressure rated. There you go, Martin, Ron.
And is ABS pressure rated?
Nope.
No. They're asking just fully PVC pressure rated.
Yes.
PVC, you gotta be careful, because, some of it, only the one that's approved for water is rated pressure. The drain, waste, and vent, is no pressure on it at all.
Ron.
Now, how about the pumps that we use for stormwater, for the discharge piping?
Well, you follow, stormwater and sewage, the only difference is the pump. It's just meant for dirty water. You notice it has a screen and small holes on there, okay? This is a sewage pump. It will let a turd in, okay? So that's the big difference between them. Now, because the hole is bigger, and because it has to let bigger things go through, the performance, these could both be half horsepower, but this is gonna pump different than this one because it's pumping bigger particles. It's harder to do. This is pumping smaller particles. It can pump farther and faster. So that's how, half horsepower doesn't mean anything. It's how the impeller and everything's designed.
Thank you, Mario.